Well, hello again. Yes and no answers to an important question. This one is going to be a tough one for me, I must admit. Was the Enlightenment a good thing? Well, you would have thought enlightenment. We're being enlightened. How can anybody object to that? Well, listen on. Well, the Enlightenment was really most pronounced historically in the 18th century in Europe. And in France and Germany, particularly, there were great innovators, writers, personalities of the Enlightenment who made their statements, got themselves into trouble, and so forth. And one of the great ones was the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Um, Immanuel Kant said what the Enlightenment was about was the notion that people should have the courage and wisdom to think for themselves and to resist using authority and tradition as a source of knowledge. That sounds pretty good. Incidentally, as an interesting aside, Immanuel Kant was born in Königsberg, a part of Prussia in the old days, site of the famous Königsberg Bridge problem when many mathematicians labored on the project of how to cross all 7 bridges in Königsberg and on the islands and the river between the 2 banks only once. And finally, a famous mathematician, Euler, made his reputation by proving that it couldn't be done. And finally, as an aside, but it was done here in Canterbury. Somebody devised a way to cross all 30 bridges in Canterbury. And by the way, I've done that walk myself, so it is possible. But anyway, on with the Enlightenment. Of course, the notion of thinking for yourself was a repudiation, a pushback against authority, particularly the authority of monarchies and the church. So, of course, it would find resistance, wouldn't it? So what we're going to do is explore some of those arguments. They are the stuff of many professors, academics, theologians, philosophers, and so forth, many using very long terms and complicated arguments. So what I'm going to do is try to make it simple, to try and summarize what I glean from all of that, which will lead you to conclude either that the Enlightenment was a good thing. It's hard for me to imagine you wouldn't conclude that, but nonetheless, or a bad thing. So here are the arguments. First of all, those who would say yes. Well, of course, the whole notion of finding your way through all the problems of the world and thinking for yourself and not bowing down to the authority of someone else to try and solve the problem for you is quite an appealing thing. It's something that doesn't appeal to everyone, by the way, even to this day. But nonetheless, that was the fundamental appeal. And of course, it existed in an environment when both monarchies and the church at times behaved very badly and had no interest or compassion for particularly those at the lower reaches of the social scale. And so it's not surprising that the downtrodden were given great sympathy, and to that extent the Enlightenment was a great humanitarian endeavor. I've mentioned that the Enlightenment was always thought of to be an 18th century movement, but in fact it really got going quite a while earlier. Some would say with Martin Luther, when he nailed his 95 theses to the church door in Wittenberg in 1517. He was saying the same thing. The church isn't going to tell us what to think. Here are the things that we really should be believing and paying attention to, and I don't care who says it, This is what reason, common sense, and prayerful consideration of the scriptures will lead you to. So that was a kind of a starting point, and one, of course, that got him into trouble, needless to say. But that, in the view of some, could be seen really as the start of the Enlightenment. Next, the Enlightenment, of course, heralded an era of science and scientific discovery. The notion that you should take a view on any scientific phenomenon only based on experimentation, on looking at the evidence, on trial and error and so forth, rather than listening to accepted authority. And of course that most famously played out in the whole debate about heliocentricity, whether the Earth rotates around the sun or not. And it was Copernicus, a Pole from Krakow, who ventured the notion that the Earth actually rotates around the sun. I was in Krakow once and asked the guide whether Copernicus got into trouble with the church for saying that, and the guide looked at me blankly and had no idea. But I'll bet he did. In any case, of course, that was followed by Galileo, who famously pronounced heliocentricity as well. Looking back to Aristotle as one of the first people to have said that, and got himself into a lot of trouble with the church. So here you have an example of the effect of the Enlightenment playing out in the world of science. We now know heliocentricity to be the explanation for the whole solar system, and we can thus judge that its impetus to push the Galileos of the world was a very positive thing. Another of the great heroes of the Enlightenment was the Frenchman Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and one of his seminal works was The Social Contract, where he famously opened with lines that translate into something like, "Everywhere man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains." And in The Social Contract, what he was advocating was the consent of the governed, that there really has to be a kind of mutual commitment between those governed and those governing them to look out for the interests of the people. And of course, in many respects, that was quite a revolutionary and unpleasant idea for many royal traditions, and of course it was said to have been one of the most important stimuli to the French Revolution. So of course, if you thought the French Revolution was a good thing, you'd think that Rousseau was a good thing, and therefore the Enlightenment was a good thing. Not everybody even agrees with that. But there is no question that Rousseau was a star of the Enlightenment. He is revered in France still. His tomb is in the Pantheon, and many of his ideas, phrases, concepts have lived on to this day. So it was through Rousseau that we really were able to understand a lot of the way they were thinking in France in those days. And finally, well, I guess more in summary than as an additional point, the unfettered mind and soul. What can be more glorious than that? How can anyone not think that the Enlightenment and its emphasis on discarding the strictures and limitations imposed by authority, tradition, custom, and so forth was not a good thing. It was great. Okay, well, now what about the no people that say no, the Enlightenment was not a good thing? Well, first I suppose we have to listen to Edmund Burke, an Anglo-Irish politician of about the same era as Kant, mid 18th century. And Burke argued against the emergence of the individual in opposition to traditional values and stated authority and so forth, and looked upon the French Revolution with horror. He said, this is what happens when you let people do whatever they want and to follow their own path. The French Revolution, while it may have seemed to some to be a worthy enterprise, overthrowing a corrupt institution and so forth, it was actually the stuff of thugs and mobs. It led to the horror, the terror. It was just a real mess. So it's a kind of a warning, a cautionary tale about the values of the Enlightenment. You should be very careful about moving very far away from the wisdom of the past and the insights from tradition. As a political philosophy or even an ethical philosophy, the values of the Enlightenment, promoting as they do the primacy of the individual, it's not a good moral guide. It leads to excess. I've commented about the results in France. The idea that you should do whatever pleases you even is not a really good way to behave. It flies in the face of Christianity. Jesus would probably have been appalled at some of the results of the Enlightenment, and he himself would argue that far more important is to love your fellow man and to focus your spiritual and moral efforts on that rather than just carving out your own way in the world. Carrying that one step further and perhaps into the modern context, the whole notion of the Enlightenment and its promotion of individual thinking makes values a kind of a consumer choice. You walk through the store of values and philosophies and so forth, and you put one thing in your basket and reject some other things in your basket, and it's really not a good way to form a life. It will basically bring you back to a kind of self-serving, asocial view of the world. That's not very good. That will lead to trouble. That will lead to people spending most of their time simply looking after themselves. Some would take the view that there have been some dire consequences of the Enlightenment. Some would say that the cult of the individual, of the search for protection within the sphere of one's own world, led to the Holocaust, to the Anthropocene despoliation of the earth, global warming, plastics, the whole works. The logic goes something like this. As a result of the scientific freedom which was stimulated by the Enlightenment, we have Darwin. And of course, Darwin explained some aspects of the way in which creatures evolve, perhaps in a way that was misinterpreted by people, but nonetheless led to the idea of survival of the fittest, perhaps eugenics. Maybe we should just kind of weed out the poor, the lame, the halt, and the blind. And eventually out of that we got Hitler, and out of that we got the Holocaust. So one can see the logic there. A dangerous game, this Enlightenment. The final argument really against the Enlightenment is to say that there is a superior alternative, sometimes referred, at least in the current age, to communitarianism, a communitarian view of the world. In that view, of course, the idea of thinking objectively and clearly about what's true and what isn't true is a good thing, but one shouldn't take that to any extreme. One must also reflect the values of the community, the welfare of the community, and must also be prepared to absorb the wisdom and the insights that come from those around you, from both tradition, from your family, from your friends, even from your local officials and so forth. So a kind of mellowed version of trying to accommodate the good parts of the Enlightenment without and avoiding its excesses. Well, gosh, some pretty powerful arguments on both sides on that one, it seems to me. Well, what's my take? Well, I guess what I think is this. I think that strong, well-developed, prominent social theories and frameworks have always been with us, and they are very often hijacked by philosophy professors, by fanatics of one sort or another, particularly dictators, autocrats looking to bolster their own position. I suppose Trump would have done so if he'd ever heard of the Enlightenment, and if he had, he probably would have said that he invented it. But moving from that, let's just say that we are in an area of kind of risky business, and we have to be aware that not only are some of the dangers that I've spoken of in this video, but also there is a danger to turn one's back on individualism and thinking for oneself. So I guess I'm advocating a moderate view, somewhere in a position where you acknowledge and exploit and rejoice in the benefits that have come down to us from the Enlightenment, our era of scientific discovery, and our willing to question everything and so forth. But at the same token, we must be alert to the dangers that can take place. I've enumerated some of those, and you can see them if you just look around. Okay, well, that's my view of it. It's a tough subject, and it's one that's certainly been with us for a long time. And I hope you got something out of it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, do the usual. Give me a like. Subscribe, please. Comment, if you will. Hit the notification bell. And I'll see you at the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.